anybody who can swiftly restore America's position in the world, it's Joe Biden. And that's what he is going to be focused on. He'll be focusing domestically, dealing with our terrible problems, but also traveling around the world and saying, yes, America is back.
This is a critical election because it could have consequences way beyond the next 4 years of where the United States is headed.
For those of us sitting here in Southeast Asia, as we watch kind of the big countries have it at each other the last couple of years, actually, what do you think is going to be the impact to governments here in Southeast Asia and to the relationship of ASEAN in particular with the US government, whether the outcome of the elections, whether it's a Trump or a Biden administration?
Southeast Asia is going to become more and more important in the next term, whoever is president. Most of the scholars here in Washington who study this closely feel that as China gains greater control over the South China Sea, the next big prize is going to be control over Southeast Asia, partly because they want to control the sea lanes going into the Indian Ocean. China is putting more and more emphasis on developing a blue water navy, but also because the markets of Southeast Asia are going to be increasingly important both to China and to the United States. So I think whether it's Biden or Trump, we're going to need to pay more attention to Southeast Asia.
Well, let's move over to the policy implications of the election, since that's what we came here to discuss this morning. Conventional wisdom typically says that American voters don't care about foreign policy, right? That at least not in the way that it sways their votes. They typically care about much more parochial, kitchen table type of issues. What do you think is going to happen? Is this going to be true for the 2020 elections as well? Will foreign policy matter?
For decades, we had a good bipartisan consensus on many parts of foreign policy, built on multilateralism, built on a web of trade agreements, built on a web of military alliances with partners in Asia and in Europe. And Joe Biden was going to be a return to stability there. He gave a celebrated speech last year in Munich at the Munich Security Conference. I think Rick was in the audience. And he said, America will be back. That was his message on foreign policy. I think it still is his message today. It will be the presidency of Barack Obama, of George W. Bush, of Bill Clinton, of George H.W. Bush. A return to America, the America that our allies have grown to know since World War II.
I think that the major foreign policy task of either a President Trump or a President Biden is coming to grips with the emergence of China as a global superpower. The economic relationship with China is paramount. So he will do everything he possibly can to preserve the relationship and try to improve the terms of trade with China and take advantage of that if he possibly can. However, I think he won't be able to do that. Trump is not going to be able, will lack the necessary diplomatic skills and capability to build an alliance of like-minded countries to deal with an emerging China. So we are not going to see a great deal of cooperation between the United States and its security partners, South Korea, Japan, Australia, or even countries like India. So the United States is going to be sort of unilaterally trying to deal with an expansion, a gradually expanding China, and trying to preserve, but finally failing to preserve, an important trading relationship.
Here's how to look at this. From 1970 something, when Richard Nixon traveled to China, until 5 years ago, call it, there was a bipartisan consensus in Washington that the way to deal with China was to engage with China. Let's bring them into the multilateral system. Let's bring them into the world trading system. If we engage with China on commerce, if we trade with them, if we invest in China, if we buy from them, We will make them part of the international web. And therefore, we will make China look like us. And this was bipartisan. This goes back to Nixon and went through every president, Democrat or Republican, through the end of Barack Obama's term. Let's engage with China and bring them out. What's happened is that, I think largely because of Xi Jinping and rising nationalism in China, China said, no, no, no. We're going to engage with you, but you're not going to change us. We're going to change you. And we're going to make the multilateral system look more like China. And we're going to impose Chinese values on multilateral organizations and trade and commerce, not vice versa.
Right? But the danger is people will feel like they're being whipsawed. They're going to be forced to make a choice between China and the United States. You see that already over the debate over Huawei, for example. And so we have to be, it seems to me, clever American diplomacy has to recognize this and not force our allies to have to make a choice, but to try to find ways to cooperate with them so that we can preserve a multilateral consensus on dealing with this fundamental change which is underway in Asia.
That has led in the last 5 years to dramatic change in Washington, from a bipartisan consensus in favor of engagement with China to now a new bipartisan consensus, realizing China cannot be engaged with in the way we thought it could. Instead, we have to face China. Whether you call it China a competitor or you call it an adversary, we're still searching for the right relationship. But it's a much less trusting, much more self-aware relationship with China. So the question is, with this new bipartisan consensus, what does a democratic response to China look like? What is the Joe Biden response? And it will be based, and I'm going to echo what Rick Burt here said, it will be based on a multilateral approach. Let's join with Japan, Korea, our allies in Southeast Asia, in Singapore. Let's bring in Modi. Let's get the Europeans involved. Let's face China multilaterally and not with a series of one-off tariffs and trade wars that Donald Trump has done. So to go from the herky-jerky trade war of Donald Trump to a much more measured, multilateral, broad-based pressure campaign to try to get China to back down and to accept that it is one player in a large world. That's Joe Biden's challenge.
Regardless of who wins this election, I don't think, as I was suggesting before, we will see the kind of American leadership we saw from 1990 to present. The United States simply doesn't have the role in the world and the power to exercise that kind of leadership. No single country has that role any longer. It is true, and I think Republicans and Democrats, strategists, will agree we are entering a world of great power competition. But that doesn't mean that the United States can't exercise leadership, but it's not going to be the kind of unipolar world that we're familiar with. I think the choice we have between a Trump and a Biden is a Biden will, in my view, will try to lead through building alliances and working with others. It'll be a more multilateral form of leadership. And with Donald Trump, you're going to see more unilateralism. You're not going to see as much effort made to build alliances. It's going to continue to be an America first foreign policy.
Anybody who can swiftly restore America's position in the world, it's Joe Biden. And that's what he is going to be focused on. He'll be focusing domestically, dealing with our terrible problems, but also traveling around the world and saying, yes, America is back.